Okay, so the saddest statistic I recently learned is that 9 out of 10 Americans don't eat enough vegetables. We all know that vegetables are good for us, which leads to an obvious question. Why aren't we eating more of them? In today's video, I'm covering 7 common obstacles that prevent us from eating vegetables, and more importantly, the simple, everyday strategies you can use to overcome them. And we're gonna get started with reason number 1. For some folks, vegetables can be just plain scary. If you grew up eating vegetables that tasted terrible, they can kind of seem like a villain in a low-budget horror film. One of the easiest ways to get over that fear factor is to simply blend your vegetables into dishes you already like. There's a reason parents do this with little kids, because it works. So try starting your morning off with a smoothie using a handful of leafy greens like spinach or kale. I find that I can add a really big handful of baby spinach to any smoothie, and I don't even notice the taste or texture difference. Delicious. A sneaky benefit, by the way, of eating vegetables in the morning is that you can kind of shift your identity. This is a point I'm stealing from James Clear, author of the best-selling Atomic Habits. But every time you take an action, it is a vote towards the person you wish to become. So every time you eat vegetables in the morning, you're telling yourself, I'm the kind of person that likes eating vegetables, and that makes you more likely to eat them throughout the day. Of course, you don't have to limit this blending technique to just in the morning. You can use it throughout the day. So if you want a delicious afternoon snack, try blending some vegetables into your favorite dip. One of my go-tos is to take some roasted or steamed beets and puree them into hummus. It tastes just as good as the classic stuff, and the color is so gorgeous that you will not be able to resist it. Another great option is to blend vegetables into sauces. So personally, I love pesto. The classic version is my favorite, but I find that I can add an entire bag of baby spinach into the spinach pesto version, and it still tastes pretty amazing. It goes great in pasta, of course, as well as your morning scramble, or you can just spread it on toast with some tomatoes. And once it starts to get cold outside, I cannot say no to a blended vegetable soup. This cauliflower soup has an entire head of cauliflower in it, but I don't think you would ever suspect it because it is so creamy and luxurious, and it's even a hit with the biggest vegetable skeptics. The next reason some folks don't like eating vegetables is that this can feel like a lot to chew, unless you're this guy. A great way to get over this chew factor is to simply slice or cut your vegetables into smaller pieces. Take this kale, for example. In this form, it's kind of roughage, not something I would be interested in eating, but if you strip out that tough middle rib, roll up the leaves and slice them super thinly, it starts to become a lot more manageable. And when you massage it with a little bit of olive oil, lemon juice, and salt, it actually gets kind of tender and makes a great salad base. Same thing goes for cabbage. This can be kind of tough and rubbery, but if you slice it super thinly and cook it in a hot pan with some olive oil, maybe a little butter, it starts to get silky and soft and even indulgent. It's great as a side dish. You can pair it with pasta, or if you're like me, you just put it on some toast. Another technique you can use to make greens a little bit more enjoyable and less cumbersome to chew is to simply fold a few handfuls into virtually any soup, stew, curry, or even scramble towards the end of cooking. They'll wilt within just a few minutes, get silky soft, and you'll barely notice they're there. Reason number 3, vegetables just don't taste good to you. If you grew up eating plain steamed vegetables, I get it. Those are sad and boring and frankly kind of gross. But roasted or charred vegetables are a completely different story, thanks to something called the Maillard reaction. To simplify things, the Maillard reaction happens when proteins and sugars in our food are transformed by exposure to heat, making them much more delicious than they were before. This is what gives roasted vegetables that amazing depth of flavor and those crisp, beautifully browned edges. In order for that browning to occur, the food needs to be exposed to relatively high temperatures. Our friend water, however, tops out at 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 Celsius, which is simply not hot enough to kickstart those reactions. But when you roast vegetables in the dry heat of an oven, say at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, the sugars and amino acids in the vegetables start to react and form hundreds of new flavor compounds. This is why a roasted Brussels sprout tastes nutty and delicious and almost sweet, whereas a steamed Brussels sprout is kind of like a sad miniature cabbage. Roasting, however, is not the only technique you can use to achieve this. You can also use a hot frying pan, particularly a cast iron or stainless steel pan. With just a little bit of oil and 7 minutes, you can transform raw, crunchy, cruciferous broccoli into deliciously charred broccoli. I like to pair it with a simple sauce and roasted spiced chickpeas for a delicious yet simple meal. Reason number 4. Vegetables just don't satisfy your crispy cravings. And this one is important because crispiness is our favorite food texture in the United States. If you don't believe me, check out the work of this Stanford scientist who surveyed 7,000 restaurant menus and found that by far, crispiness was the most common adjective used. The good news is that you can get that elusive crispy texture in vegetables, and I'm not just talking about French fries. Take mushrooms, for example. You probably associate them with being chewy and meaty, maybe soggy if you're not cooking them right. But if you tear them into strips and toss them with some oil and salt, put them in a hot oven, they come out delightfully crispy, and they make such a good topping for any kind of noodle soup. Kale chips are another great option. All you need are kale leaves, olive oil, and a few simple seasonings. Once you put them in the oven, they come out crispy, salty, and surprisingly addictive. My favorite crispy vegetable might be the Indo-Chinese dish Gobi Manchurian. You take some cauliflower and batter it, and then you deep fry it or bake it and toss it with a stir fry. The deep fried version is admittedly the crispiest option, but even the baked version comes out pretty incredible. Oh, and if you have a copy of my new cookbook, Big Vegan Flavor, definitely check out page 404. There's a recipe for maple roasted squash. When you slice it thinly, it gets kind of crisp and chewy in the oven, and it is super delicious. Reason number 5, your vegetables spoil too quickly. Opening your fridge to realize that the vegetables you bought last week have already gone bad is one of the most devastating feelings. Right up there with realizing that you've locked yourself out of the house. Again. Fiddlesticks! The good news is that there are several ways you can keep your vegetables fresh for longer. My first tip would be to just simply learn how to store different vegetables appropriately. I could probably do a whole video on this topic, so I'm not gonna go into too much depth here, but if you are interested in that video, let me know in the comments below. But one tip to extend the shelf life of your leafy greens is when you get home from the grocery store, strip out that tough rib in the middle and then tear the leaves or slice them depending on how you want to use them. Wash and dry them, and then place them in a reusable bag perforated with some holes so that there's ventilation, and they should stay good in the fridge for up to a week. This one trick alone has increased the volume of kale I eat by about 37.5%. Very accurate. My next tip is to try pickling your vegetables. Pickled vegetables will stay good for weeks in your fridge, and they add a fun, salty, tangy pop to dishes as diverse as avocado toast, tacos, and even Indian dal. It's really simple to quick pickle vegetables. All you need is vinegar, water, salt, and sugar, and you can use lots of different vegetables, but some of my go-tos are red onions, chili peppers, radishes, and carrots. If you have a copy of my new cookbook, Big Vegan Flavor, pop over to page 168 for a chart with how to quick pickle different vegetables with flavor variations. And my third tip is to check out the freezer aisle of your grocery store. Frozen vegetables have an incredibly long shelf life, and while I wouldn't use them in a salad, they do work pretty well in stir fries, soups, and curries. They go straight from the freezer to the pan, no thawing needed. Reason number 6, it takes you too long to prepare vegetables. I get that we're all busy these days, but there are a few techniques you can use to make this process easier on yourself, even if you don't have a ton of time to cook during the week. First things first, try doing your future self a little favor by doing some meal prep on the weekend. Take 30 minutes or so to chop and store your vegetables and come up with a plan for how to use them during the week. I know that when I have pre-labeled bags of shredded massaged kale, sliced cabbage, and sliced bell peppers, I am so much more likely to make a few salads and stir fries during the week. Second, it is super helpful to have some time-saving equipment. Hopefully you already have a good chef's knife that you sharpen regularly. If you don't, I've left a couple knife recommendations in the description box below. Beyond that, a mandolin is incredibly helpful for slicing vegetables quickly and thinly. Works great on so many things from shallots to carrots to fennel. For bigger jobs, a food processor is incredibly handy. If I try to shred 2 pounds of Brussels sprouts by hand, it's gonna take me approximately 84 years. But when I use the slicing disc on my food processor, it takes about 2 minutes and it's actually very satisfying to use. Reason number 7, you think of vegetables as an obligation. If you struggle with healthy eating advice because it just feels like a restrictive diet, this one tip or mindset shift can be super helpful. And that is to ask yourself the following question. What would it look like to eat vegetables not because they're good for me, but because they are truly delicious? When I started asking myself that question, it completely transformed my relationship to vegetables and my cooking got so much better. These days, I don't feel obligated to eat vegetables because they're healthy. I eat them because I love them. They're truly delicious and I can turn them into my favorite comfort foods. One easy way to get into this mindset is to follow social media accounts that make cooking vegetables fun. For instance, you might not think of yourself as a zucchini lover, but if you're scrolling the apps and you see an intriguing zucchini recipe, you're gonna be naturally more excited to cook with it. And if you're like me and you're trying to limit your social media usage, buying a few vegetable-forward cookbooks is a great way to find inspiration. If you have a copy of Big Vegan Flavor, definitely check out Chapter 9, Big Personality Salads, and Chapter 10, Vegetables Are the Main Event. I have one final quick tip, but before I get to that, I just want to let you know that I've created a free PDF guide to accompany this video. It has all of today's tips and tricks, plus any of the recipes you saw, so check out the link in the description box below or scan this QR code. My last piece of advice to help you eat more vegetables is to fall in love with salads. I know that seems like a tall order, but I created an entire video on how I myself did just that after years of dreading salad. You can check it out right here, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!